Get to know the funds listed in the top holdings of our Global Dynamic Allocation funds and take a closer look at the top-notch fund managers Architas works with. Good morning, Axa. I'm Tin Militante, Advisor Transformation Manager from DLND. Welcome to another episode of Investment News Live. Today, we are going to look into the top holdings of GDAF and also get to know the fund managers Architas works with in handling these funds. This morning, we have with us Investment Solutions Director Dexter Agkawili to help us grasp GDAF investments better. Welcome to the show, Dex.
Thank you for having me, Tin. It's a pleasure to be here. And good morning, Axa.
Alright, so let's talk about the Global Dynamic Allocation Funds.
Okay.
Pag tinitignan natin yung fund fact sheet ng GDAFs, specifically dun sa top holdings, we'll see specific fund names. As compared to, let's say, the Global Advantage Fund or GAF, specific equities ang nakikita natin like Apple, Microsoft. So Dex, can you explain to us how the Global Dynamic Allocation Funds are invested into these different funds?
Okay, so for us to have a better understanding of how the GDAF funds are invested, we should first look into how exactly do we go through our investing, like from an individual investor. For example, an individual investor would have to go to a bank or a brokerage firm to open an account and then invests into bonds or stocks, right?
Okay.
I understand you also do that.
Yes, so actually I do that. Like what I do is I directly invest, let's say in equities. I open an account and then I select which companies I want to invest in. But the thing is with that, I don't have a lot of time. So I just try to squeeze in some research and also look into ano ba yung mga viable investments. But in terms of really monitoring the market day in, day out, I'm unable to do that because I have other things to do.
Yes, so indirectly investing, you would have to do that research and then make that investment decision.
Right.
And that's why most of the investors or retail investors out there invests through a collective investment scheme or a pooled fund, commonly known as a mutual fund or a unit investment trust fund.
So this is another way to
of
invest. Yes.
Exactly. If I may ask, do you get to also invest into such funds?
Yes, I also have those funds. I go to different banks. I try to canvas. But then again, of course, I won't just put my money into any fund. So it still needs some research, some time that I need to allocate.
Correct. And usually what happens is that when an investor like you would open another account with another bank, and then invest into their funds, you would end up just with 2 or 3 funds, right?
Right. But what's good about that is I get to avail of investment expertise as well, though, from the fund managers of these mutual funds.
Correct. And all you have to do is constantly just put in money as you save and invest. And you have a fund manager doing that for you.
Right.
So, and there's another way of investing. And imagine if an investor would have more than 3 funds, okay, he would still have to choose, right?
Right.
And that's where a fund of funds kind of investment actually helps out, where the investor will just invest into one fund, and it is that fund manager who will then now invest into different funds of different asset managers.
Right.
Now, one good thing with that is we don't have to do the research. And it's the fund manager who would be now researching about these fund managers and where they are good at, what their expertise are. That's exactly what Architas does for our Global Dynamic Allocation funds.
Right.
So the funds that we put into the GDAF funds are then invested by Architas in different global fund managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, PIMCO. These are the top global asset managers that we partner with.
So that being said, by investing in global dynamic allocation funds, we are able to access the investment expertise of the different top-notch fund managers. Is that
Yes,
right?
that is correct. And we don't have to do the research on our own. Rather, we can rely on a global asset manager like Argitas to do this for us.
Right. So given that, diba, yung global dynamic allocation funds, we have three types or three funds.
Funds, yes.
So three types of global dynamic allocation funds. And what you're saying is it works in this type of structure na fund of funds siya. So can you elaborate further? Ano bang itsura ng, let's say, global dynamic allocation fund, stable, multi-asset, and growth in relation to having this type of structure?
Right. Good thing you mentioned that. So, usually kasi iniisip that GDAF is just one fund. Actually, GDAF, we have three kinds of GDAF funds. The GDAF Stable, GDAF Multi-Asset, and the GDAF Growth.
Right.
The GDAF Stable is globally diversified into 5 major regions. So, the US, Europe, Asia, emerging markets, and even Japan. And it's invested into bond funds all across those 5 major regions. Now, again, so the GDAF Stable invests into different asset managers na expert into maybe a particular kind of fixed income or particular kind of strategy. Okay. One good example of a global asset manager known in the fixed income would be PIMCO. Now, GDAF Multi-Asset, also a fund of funds wherein it is invested into equity and bond funds. So the GDAF Multi-Asset would have these fund managers again, choosing between equity fund managers and fixed income fund managers, and then invests into their funds. And so as with the GDAF Growth, where it's again diversified across those 5 major regions that I mentioned, and each region there is like a specialist, a particular specialist, and Architas is the one who gets to choose which kind of fund of a fund manager would be appropriate given a particular situation.
Right. So in summary, for GDAF Stable, we have bond funds in them, and we have world-class, top-notch bond fund managers overseeing these investments.
Correct.
For GDAF Multi-Asset, meron naman tayong, dahil ano siya, bond funds and equity funds, yung mga nag-handle na fund managers doon would be best in handling bond funds and best also in handling equity funds. And with GDAF Stable, yan naman ay invested sa equity funds globally. So we also have the best equity fund managers worldwide handling GDAF Stable.
Yes. And it is worthy to note na the reason why we have 3 funds, fixed income, balanced fund, and an equity fund, is that to ensure that we get to offer the customer the appropriate portfolio or diversified portfolio that is attuned to his or her risk profile.
Okay. So for example, kung aggressive si investor, ang most likely na GDAF fund appropriate for this investor would be GDAF Growth.
Yes.
Dahil for equities, and yun yung pinaka-aggressive among the 3. But for less aggressive customers, let's say moderately aggressive lang siya, then we can offer GDAF Multi-Asset.
Yes. To make it simple, just choose one fund and choose another if you want, but at least it's easier to monitor. And these 3 funds are actively managed.
Okay, by actively managed, what does that exactly mean? So that our distributors can really know what this term means.
Sige. Being actively managed, it helps us in managing 1, the risk, and also 2, in maximizing the opportunities out there. For example, the fund is invested across 5 major regions. Now, there will be times one region will be performing well and another region will not be performing well. In being actively managed, the fund manager can reduce the exposure in a market that is not doing well and put more money into a market that is doing quite well. And through time, things will change. One region would perform versus the other, or there will be times all would go down, but there's still a safe haven like cash. You can put it in cash. So it's the fund manager doing that.
Right.
Rather than, I know that there are certain distributors who are also advising their customers in doing that. They're the ones doing the fund switching for the customer. Right? That is good if you can help give that advice. The advantage here, though, is the distributor can just really focus on servicing the customer while managing the allocation, may it be on the bonds, the stocks, or to cash. You can leave that to the fund manager.
Right. So let's say if I'm an investor who put in money in the Global Dynamic Allocation funds, while I'm sitting here working, fund managers, expert fund managers, are overseeing my investments and making investment decisions for me. So, not only that, if let's say nakita nila na, kailangan pala na mas magkaroon ng exposure, let's say in Asia, because mas nag-grow, mas nag-recover ang Asia, then the fund managers will do that for me. That being said, they are already thinking as to how they can optimize my earnings and also spread out the risk. And for me, I just have to sit here and, okay, sila na bahala. Kasi naka-monitor naman sila, diba?
Yes, true. Or pwede ka magdagdag.
Pwede rin ako magdagdag.
You can just focus on periodically putting in more money while the fund manager manage the money to ensure that you get the desired results.
Right. Oh, that's quite convenient actually, diba? Instead of always monitoring the market, or I can't be in two places at the same time. So if I want that peace of mind, then Global Dynamic Allocation funds would work for me.
Now, if for the appreciation also of the audience, pagdating sa mga fund of funds, what exactly do we get out of it? What are the benefits? So one is that the fact that we have a global asset manager doing it for us. They're the ones doing that rigorous fund selection and monitoring. So, hindi na natin iisipin kapag hindi na maganda yung performance ng isang fund,
kailangan mag-fund switch or kailangan mag-allocate.
Sila na yung gagawa nun. They are going to change the fund that they're invested in, for example, in the US, to change it or shift it to another region. Another is VIP access. What do I mean by this? Since we have a global fund manager like Architas, the Axa Group, negotiating and investing into the funds of these global asset managers as well. Think of it as like wholesale. They get to pool the funds and then they get to negotiate where we get to be invested into funds that would usually be available for high net worth individuals. So if we go through the fund fact sheets, you'd see there ang daming funds that we are invested in. And minsan doon, hindi natin alam yung mga names. Later on, we could elaborate on some companies that they are invested in. No? Point there is that usually mga ultra-rich lang nakaka-invest na. But through the GDAF funds, we're making this available to our retail customers.
Right. So that being said, if let's say I want to invest in a high net worth type of fund, indirectly I'm doing that when I invest in one of our Global Dynamic Allocation funds.
Correct. Worth sharing, no? When we first launched Asset Master and the GDAF funds were launched together with it, we were going through different sessions, pocket sessions, with high net worth customers of ours. And there was one person in the audience who approached me, and he mentioned about, I noticed this particular fund manager is part of the investments. How were you able to invest into their funds? Because we've been trying, we couldn't. So the point of that short story of mine is that ayun yung advantage of us being an institutional investor. We get to have access to investment funds na even the rich couldn't readily access.
Right.
Okay? But only goes to show that the rich already are familiar on these kinds of investment funds.
Yes.
And it's now we're making this more convenient and accessible to our retail customers. And I think third point is more of cost. The fact na we have the Axa Group negotiating when it comes to cost. It's more cost effective for our investors to buy through our fund of funds rather than even if they're high net worth, if they're trying to access the funds that the GDAF funds are invested in. They would still be charged a certain amount.
So by cost, you're saying the AMC, right? Or the asset management charge of the GDAFs?
GDAFs and the asset management charge of, let's say, the underlying funds that we are invested in. Because what we get to invest in is what we call an institutional share class. So, sa mga global funds, merong pang retail at merong pang institutions. Pang institutions, parang wholesale yan. Mas maliit yung asset management charge for institutions.
So that being said, when our customers invest in global dynamic allocation funds, the AMC or the asset management charge that they pay for actually gives access already to top-notch fund managers at a reasonable price.
Correct. Now, worth highlighting again, one of the key propositions of the GDAF funds is its diversification, the degree of diversification that we get to offer. And because it's a fund of fund structure, that's how we can diversify across these 5 major regions and across more than 5 global asset managers. Imagine if you compare our GDAF funds to other fund of funds out there, we have the most diversified fund of funds where we at least have 8 to as much as even 15 underlying funds in our portfolio.
Right, so we're diversified not just in terms of region, but also in terms of fund managers handling these set of funds.
Yes. And don't forget, these 3 funds, the GDAF Stable, Multi-Asset, and Growth, are all actively managed to manage the risk that we take and maximize the return that we get out of our investments.
Right. Bale, sobrang alagang-alaga talaga yung funds na to ng mga fund managers to maximize profit and spread out risk.
Correct. Now, maybe you'd like to go into, let's say, into the detail of a particular fund.
Okay, so let's say Global Dynamic Allocation Funds, multi-asset. So that's invested in bond funds and equity funds. But
Yes.
let's take a closer look. Ano ba yung mga funds na to at ano ba yung key investments sa loob ng mga funds?
Yeah.
So tingnan natin.
Sige, let's go through GDAF Multi-Asset since it has both equities and bond funds.
Sige.
So, for example, we have in GDAF Multi-Asset investment managers like Vanguard, okay? And even BlackRock. These are the top asset managers who are actually known on the equities in equities asset class.
Okay, so can you give us examples of these funds that are listed in the top holdings? Sino ba yung mga fund managers? And ano ba yung mga funds na to? Plus yung key investments within these funds.
All right, so let's go through one. For example, you'd see in the multi-asset top holdings, Vanguard Investment Series. So that's the name of the fund. The fund manager is Vanguard. Now, Vanguard is really known of managing equity portfolios or equity funds at a low cost. And ano naman yung laman niya? Like one top holding niya is AstraZeneca and Novartis. So they would have some holdings on healthcare or yung mga pharma. Yeah, that's one good example.
That's actually good, lalo na ngayon, di ba? Pharmaceutical companies are thriving because we're looking for vaccines, or vaccines are being delivered worldwide. So we have AstraZeneca, Novartis, among others.
Yes. Okay. Another example is Architas Selection US. So it is an actively managed portfolio invested in the US, and One of the top holdings would be Apple and Amazon.
So this Architas Selection US is handled by Architas, in your fund manager.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is directly invested into these companies naman. One example, another is Architas Selection Europe, which is an actively managed portfolio invested in Europe, and top holdings would be the likes of Nestle and Allianz. So even if they're a competitor, we invest in them.
Right.
So another is PineBridge Asia Pacific Invest, and the fund manager there is PineBridge, and it's invested in the likes of DBS Holdings and China Development Bank.
So mga financial institutions, yung ibang holdings niya.
Yes, and notice that we now choose a different fund manager in a different region, like this is Asia.
Right.
Okay. So another fund manager would be Axa Investment Managers, and they're the ones managing the fund Axa Rosenberg Equity Alpha, which is one of the holdings of our multi-asset. Now, I chose this particular fund because while Axa is known as a global insurer, here in the Philippines, we don't know actually that Axa is also a global asset manager.
Right.
And we have a wholly owned subsidiary called Axa IM and Architas on the asset management space.
So what you're saying is AXA Philippines, that's the insurance entity of AXA here. But then there's also a different entity such as AXA IM, which is actually a fund manager overseeing the Axa Rosenberg Equity Alpha.
Yes. So the AXA IM is owned by AXA Group, and we have the same parent. I mean, AXA Philippines is also partly owned by the AXA Group.
Okay, I got it.
Then that particular fund of AXA IM, the Axa Rosenberg Equity Alpha, is invested in ASML Holdings and SAP. SAP is into software development, which is based in Germany, for
Okay, so
example.
dito, Europe naman. Kanina may China, may America, ngayon Europe
Yes.
na equities.
And we choose a different fund manager who is quite knowledgeable of that particular market.
Right.
In this case, Axa Investment Managers. Now, another example would be the iShares Core Global Aggregate. And it is invested more of into fixed income or bonds. So it has investments in Unilever and also in US Treasuries.
So this one, it's invested not just in government bonds, but also corporate bonds.
Yes, top corporate bonds.
Sino yung fund manager ng iShares?
iShares is a branding of BlackRock, and BlackRock is the top asset manager, as in number one in the whole world when it comes to asset management. And lastly, we have Fidelity Funds Asia Pacific, and the fund manager there is Fidelity, a US-based company, and it's invested in Taiwan Semiconductors Manufacturing and Hangzhou Hikvision Digital Tech.
So Asia companies. Some examples would be tech firms in
Correct.
Asia. Okay, so if we look at the Global Dynamic Allocation Funds multi-asset or GDAF multi-asset, we can see that indeed, diba, invested siya in bond funds such as yung iShares Core Global Aggregate ng BlackRock na may corporate bonds, may government bonds. But at the same time, it's also invested in equity funds worldwide. So meron tayong equity funds na focused sa European region, meron sa America, meron sa Asia.
Correct. So here we get to show exactly how diversified it is, yet how we get to have specialists in a particular region or particular asset class to manage the funds for us.
Ang galing, ang galing. Ngayon, mas na-appreciate ko yung GDAF multi-asset. So now, it's not just, basta bond funds and equity funds invested yan. Ngayon, we are able to actually identify kung ano ba yung fund managers na nag-oversee ng funds na to, and even mention specific investments such as investments in Unilever bonds, investments in TSMCI or Taiwan Semiconductor, or even US Treasury bonds, all in one fund.
Yes.
Alright, so let's get to know naman yung mga fund managers kasi naisa-isa na natin yung mga top holdings or funds ng GDAF Multi-Asset. So, can we zoom into yung mga PIMCO, BlackRock? Can you tell us more about that, Dex?
Now, let's look into these top-notch global asset managers that the GDAF funds are invested in. First, we have BlackRock. And in our GDAF funds, in our multi-asset, they have the iShares Core Global Aggregate. And for our GDAF growth, it is invested into the iShares North America.
Ano naman yung expertise ng BlackRock?
They're really expert when it comes to actively managed portfolios or actively managed funds.
Okay, so let's look into another top-notch fund manager.
And we have Vanguard as well. Vanguard is the number 2 ranked. And
Ano saan siya invested? No? Anong pangalan ng fund? Yeah.
so we do have the Vanguard Investment series. So both are stable, multi-asset, and growth are invested into Vanguard. Now, as mentioned earlier, when it comes to Vanguard, their specialization is really to come up with cost or low-cost mutual funds or ETFs.
So yun naman yung ano niya, focus or yun yung kanyang expertise.
Yes.
Okay, so how about PIMCO?
So PIMCO naman, they're quite known when it comes to fixed income funds. And they are more of an active fund manager when it comes to fixed income funds.
Oh, so that being said, ano yung pangalan naman ng fund niya na part of our Global Dynamic Allocation Funds?
So we are invested in the PIMCO GIS Global Bond Fund. That's one of the well-known funds of PIMCO.
And this is part of GDAF
GDAF stable.
Yes. All right. And then let's go to Axa Investment Managers or
Yes.
Axa IM.
IM, yeah,
Yes.
one of my favorites. So AXA IM, part of the top 10 global asset managers as well. And they have the AXA Rosenberg Equity Alpha, where our multi-asset is invested in. And we also have the AXA World funds when it comes to fixed income. So our stable fund is invested there. And we also have our AXA IM fixed income. So one good thing with AXA IM is that they're really into multi-assets, maybe equities or fixed income, and they're into more of actively managed funds.
Okay. So now we've talked about BlackRock, Vanguard, PIMCO, Axa IM. Ano pa ba yung ibang top-notch fund managers?
Worth mentioning, of course, Architas. Architas naman, their specialization really is about what we call multi-manager. Meaning, they invest into the funds or of other asset managers, or they look into the expertise of other asset managers and delegates a certain portion of the fund that they're managing to that asset manager. So, again, the main difference of Architas is that they are a multi-manager. They're good in selecting other fund managers and good in selecting other funds.
So ano naman yung mga funds na in-oversee ni Architas within the Global Dynamic Allocation Fund?
So, they have created the Architas Selection US and the Architas Selection Europe. And they'll be creating more. Whole point there is that they could provide really a more diversified, actively managed portfolio.
Right. So and these funds are part of stable,
Multi-asset,
and
and
growth. Okay, and growth. All right. And then let's look into Fidelity.
Yes. So Fidelity. Fidelity, one good thing with them is that they're really strong when it comes to equity funds. Ang big difference of their style is that ito yung tinatawag nating bottom-up approach. So bottom-up approach is all about looking into the company, analyzing the company. Is it a good company? If it passes their requirements, they can now create a portfolio out of those good companies in different industries.
So what you're saying is a bottom-up approach would mean really looking into companies and then zooming out.
Yeah,
right?
zooming out.
Sa sector.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Because another approach, like the reverse of that is top-down,
Pag ganon.
which
Sector,
is sector,
and then company.
yes.
Okay, that's clear. Okay. So yung fund na hinahandle ng Fidelity would be, anong pangalan ng funds na yun?
So we do have Fidelity Funds Asia Pacific as part of our multi-asset and growth portfolios.
Okay, so wow, now we have more knowledge or understanding as to ano ba yung mga funds, ano ba yung key investments, and also yung top-notch fund managers handling the Global Dynamic Allocation funds. Thank you, Dex. I know you have a very busy schedule, but you still took the time to explain to us the Global Dynamic Allocation Fund.
It is my pleasure, Tin, to be in your show and to be here with our distributors to help impart some tidbits about our Global Dynamic Allocation funds. And just like to leave a message to our distributors that always remember, here in Axa, we don't just provide investments, we provide solutions.
Thank you so much, Dex. And now it is time for our Menti Meter. Ready your phones, go to menti.com and type the code flashed on your screen. In this portion of the episode, let's ask Emma. In this episode, we've learned who the top-notch fund managers are in the GDAF, as well as the key investments in these funds. Now, we are fully equipped when facing our customers with their investment-related queries. If you want to know more about our funds and how we can further help our clients, you may refer to LMS online modules or you may attend live virtual sessions. We will be flashing the training schedules on your screen. Your thoughts, opinions, and feedback are important to us. We want to know what you want to know. Please take time to answer our survey so that we may understand how we may help you better. We've reached the end of today's broadcast. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next week, same time, same place. Once again, I'm Tin Militante, and this has been Investment News Live.